Hey everybody, you're listening to If Walls Could Talk, a podcast sponsored by Huffcore. With me today, I have Ambre Luellen and Dije Perolli. Dije handles architecture and design relations for Huffcore's Northeast region of the United States, and Ambre handles architecture and design relations for Huffcore's southern region of the United States. So what do you define as the southern region, Ambre?
So Southern is going to be all of Texas because, everyone knows how large Texas is, so it's the size of multiple states. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about acoustics since, with operable walls, we're typically trying to do one of three things when it comes to sound and acoustic walls, whether it's keeping sound from being transmitted to another room, keeping it from being reflected within the space, or just helping absorb sound within a space. There's different ways to do that with operable walls since they can be used to fine tune spaces. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Great. Do either of you ever have a project where it calls for operable walls, but they have no interest or understanding or care for acoustical properties, and you have to kind of try to educate them on the capabilities of operable partitions and what you can actually do? Um,
Well,
you're not just dividing space, but you can divide sound as well. Do you ever have those conversations?
yes. Very often, an architect or designer will call, and um, you know, if they're not working with an acoustician, sometimes they are. They have direction of what type of sound they're trying to, shoot for, and what type of acoustic they're looking for. Other times, they're looking to us to ask us what the low end of the spectrum is, the mid range, and the higher end. And then there are times that somebody's just looking for an operable wall for a design intent, and the acoustics are not very important to them, but that's more rare.
So one thing that architects might not realize or designers might not realize, they can be specifying an operable wall of STC 56, sometimes all the way up to 60 within the industry. But one thing they don't realize is your operable wall STC rating is just based on the single building component, such as an operable wall. So in order to get that operable wall to perform to the best of its ability, you really have to make sure the surrounding construction matches or exceeds that of an operable wall. Otherwise, you might have an operable wall that has a, I'd say STC rating of 56, but it's surrounded by glass or windows or past doors. That's only going to perform to the STC rating of the surrounding construction, which is going to give you your NIC rating. So at that point, you're a little overkill with an operable wall if it's really going to be in a space that has closer to a STC rating of a 40 to a 45.
Dia actually had a project recently out east, and I don't know, if you can share who it was or not. It's fine if you can or can't. And I remember Dia and I were talking a few weeks ago about the, and we'll show this in the video. I'll show the images of this, the 600 series operable partitions, and then there was glass above, I think. Dia, was that correct?
Yes, it was correct. It was several layers of glass of different thicknesses and airspace in between. They had worked with an acoustician who was not real keen on the idea of glass to start with because glass can be a weak point for sound to transmit. But they basically had done several panes of glass, different thicknesses, to stop the sound waves from going through, and then airspace as well.
Gotcha. So that's another thing that there's a lot of different things that can be done and things that we do to help improve the acoustics of a certain space.
One thing, Jeff, I think we should kind of clarify what STC is for people that don't know. That's the ability to stop that sound transference from one space to the next. In the industry, we throw around that term a lot, but not everyone might know what that means. It's a test that's done in a laboratory under ideal conditions, and it's expressed as a scientific two-digit number. And then every product on the market of similar product has to be tested at the same size, height, and width. It's a system test, as in relation to, it's not a panel test. It's a system test.
Yes, and even to go on that a little bit, just to dummy it down for those of you who might be listening but still aren't aware, it's basically just a lab test, perfect envelope is what your operable walls are going to be in. So there's not going to be any type of flanking path going on.
And usually the products that perform at a higher STC are more dense and heavy. They are more dense and heavy products. And then, like Amber's saying, other factors in the space come into play as well when you're looking at the overall acoustics of the room.
Okay. And speaking of dense and heavy, we always talk about one of the great things about Huffcore that I think we take for granted and forget about sometimes is how our panels are top supported. There is no bottom rail. It's just at the top. And I remember Amber at the HD Expo explained it. What was the phrase, Amber?
Panels glide along the top track just like butter. They're so easy to operate and to move that your grandmother could honestly move those panels.
Dia, I once heard you in a conversation with somebody talking about something called, I think it was Flutter Echo. What the heck is Flutter Echo?
It's an acoustical concern in rooms that have very hard surfaces. So when you have a lot of glass, polished concrete floors, painted hard ceilings, so the condition is the sound starts to bounce back and forth between the parallel hard surfaces in the room. So that could be your ceiling, your wall, your floor, and that's when you get that effect.
And is there something that can be done to help minimize that effect?
Yeah, there's different ways to deal with that effect. Obviously there are other ways besides the operable wall with acoustical panels, but on the operable wall, that's when you can select the model that has the NRC value on it. So the NRC value is that product's ability to absorb sound. Um, it's also a test, an NRC test is done in a lab, and it's also done, under ideal conditions, and it's expressed also as a scientific, 2-digit number. Um, so every operable wall system, has one model that can absorb sound. You could select, if you wanted to, select that model. Like Amber said, with operable walls, most times we're trying to reflect the sound back into the room. It's usually bouncing off and reflecting. We're never trying to transmit through. When she was talking about those 3 different ways we deal with sound.
And with the NRC rating, there's a couple different ways you can get operable walls to absorb sound. One way that's very common within the industry is using perforated panels. And then another way is with like a carpet type, because if you can just keep it, to remember it, like if you can breathe through a material, then more than likely that's going to have some capability to absorb. So carpet is a very good product to put on panels for a finish if you're needing to absorb sound.
So I've heard the industry veterans, they refer to them the perforated panels or the perf panels. Can you explain a little bit more what that means or what that is?
Yeah, so the micro perforated panels are just going to be tiny, tiny perforations, little tiny holes punched in all over the panels. So again, that goes back to me saying if you can breathe through it, more than likely it's gonna have some capability to absorb sound. So whereas your high STC panels that are, flat or possibly finished in marker surfaced or vinyl, if you blow on that, it's just going to bounce right off. So that's not going to be able to absorb anything. The micro perforated panels with the tiny holes you'll be able to blow into, and that air within the panel is going to give capabilities to absorb some of that sound. So that will play into when you're trying to get an NRC rating with your operable partitions.
And when you do have that NRC rating, you are sacrificing the STC rating, but it's again, it's for a different need in the room.
Yes, and there are ways, I mentioned at the beginning to fine tune your spaces with different panels. So if depending on what's going on one wall might have something different than, the adjacent wall that's maybe glass. You can mix and match panels as well. So you can have perforated panels with high STC rated panels, and you can get, I believe it's a 0.65, which is really good for your NRC rating with operable walls.
At Huffcore, we actually have our own sound lab, which we are regularly testing our products um, and making sure they adhere to the STCs that we've published. And, also when an architect has a special project and they're trying to achieve something special, we can work with our sound lab to get them information that may be helpful.
That's a great point, Dia, because it's very important that if you're specifying an operable wall that has an STC rating, that you make sure to get a sound test lab report that is somewhat from, recent times. You would be surprised how many times I've been to firms and, looked at old sound test lab reports that are from 1970s. And I mean, you can imagine how much has changed since then with, operable walls in general. And this is sort of a funny fact, but now that it's baseball season, the first high five was actually invented in 1977. So imagine what has changed just with the high fives. So you can only imagine how much change has happened with operable walls.
I find that the Sound Lab is very helpful when there's a special project and they're trying to run. Sometimes we work on very high acoustic projects where they actually want two operable walls with a spaced corridor to get even way beyond what you'd normally be able to achieve in the field with an operable wall. And our Sound Lab is able to run simulations, of what those numbers might look like for, what STC they might be able to achieve with that. Um, and then, of course, if they need the report as well, we can get that from the Sound Lab for the STC.
Speaking of STC, I was talking with Jen the other day, and I don't remember the number, of course, but somewhere in the 40s, I think, is about where like a typical stud wall with insulation and drywall on each side. Is that correct? Like your typical wall?
Your typical drywall insulation is actually going to be anywhere from, I think it's closer to 34 STC.
I don't think it even comes to 45 with double.
Yeah, no, it's 30 to 34 for your typical wall construction. That's like a wood stud construction with insulation and 5/8 drywall on both sides. I know that's right at 30 to 34.
Is there such a thing as, going too high, or somebody asking for, a really high STC where they're never even going to really notice the difference? Is there a point, I guess?
Yes, and that's where I was saying at the very beginning, where you want to make sure the space where you are having an operable wall, you want to make sure that space that the wall is going to be in either meets or exceeds that of the STC. So if it's going to go within a conference room that's surrounded by glass, say the glass is going to have a STC rating, say 45. Well, at that point, you don't need an operable wall with STC of 60 because your wall is not going to be able to perform to the best of its ability, which would be STC 60, when the surrounding construction only, meets or exceeds that of 40 to 45.
Exactly. So 5/8 drywall, if both sides were steel studs, would only be a 39 STC. And one thing to keep in mind with drywall, there's no NRC ever on drywall. And like Amber's saying, the surrounding construction is very important, and to make sure that your operable wall could perform its best. but operable walls in general tend to perform 8 to 10 points less in the field than in the ideal test.
Because of the surroundings?
Yes, because of the surroundings. And a lot of times the things that are those problems or known liabilities, if I may, are some of the open plenums, flooring, carpeting, panels, gas and hot water pipes, sprinklers, ductwork. These are the kind of things that affect the operable partition in the field.
So, Dia and Amber, we talked about this for just a brief moment in the beginning here, but what do you do on a day-to-day basis with Huffcore and operable partitions all day, every day? What is it that you do at Huffcore?
Well, I'm working with the A&D community and, questions on the early design side, trying to narrow down the product that they might need, educating them about the options, the seals, the acoustics, all that fun stuff we were talking about today, and working with them to create the correct specification, get them some early design drawings, and answer any questions, basically be that resource for any questions on our products that they need. Of course, I also do educational classes, AIA and IDCEC approved classes, so they can get an overview. If more than one person needs to learn, we can do that for, a firm. But on the individual project basis, same thing. We're talking about all the same options, all the same acoustics, all the same things they need to know to figure out, which operable wall would be best for their space.
Thank you, Dia. I appreciate that very much. And just so anybody who's listening, so you know that if you have questions, anything and everything regarding operable partitions, operable walls, glass walls, whatever you want to call them, Amber and Dia would be more than happy to answer those for you. If you go to the contact tab on our website, send us your questions. We'd be happy to help you out with that. And if you are looking for some CEU courses on flexible space, we have those on our website as well under the education tab. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you two again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
So, are we supposed to introduce ourselves or just go straight into it?
I just did.
Okay. Well, I wasn't sure if we were supposed to say anything else because I thought you were telling her to. Okay.
You know what? Okay, what's a question? Okay.